All right, welcome back to African Black Psychology. We're dealing with worldview paradigms in chapter 3. Once to begin discussing, it's better to be recording sound, the importance and function of worldview systems. Seem to be a challenging or interesting concept to reflect on. If we think about worldview systems, every individual operates according to some group's concept of reality. Ideally, under normal, natural circumstances, the group that we identify with is usually our own indigenous cultural group. Again, under normal, natural circumstances. So we might consider our beliefs, our language, our traditions, how we present ourselves, our aesthetic would reflect that of our own indigenous cultural group. However, in unnatural circumstances, which seems to be the case of Africans specifically in America since colonization, oftentimes we do not identify with the group that is our indigenous cultural group. So what we'll have, and yes, I'm coming for some of y'all next, what we'll have are Africans who believe that beauty is lace front wigs and hazel or colored eyes, contouring the nose, things that remove a connection to African features. So in this course, we're addressing the idea first that how we see the world should be couched in and very much centered around who we are, our indigenous group. We also recognizing that based on colonization, African people have been challenged in our mind, how we think about and how we see ourselves. So because of what we talked about in chapter 2, the creation of this idea of race and then the hierarchy amongst African people based on color and colorism, we have African people who look in the mirror and they don't feel good about themselves and who they are because they feel like they should be lighter or whiter, or their hair isn't straight enough or long enough, or their nose is too wide, their lips are too thick. Meanwhile, we have people of other cultures who attempt to take on some of the look of African people. So when we think of survival thrusts, sometimes this concept could be a little interesting. When we think of survival thrusts, cultural survival thrusts, it's a condition and a process of survival maintenance that is indigenous to and characterizes a racial cultural group's genetic and geohistorical pattern undergirded by their cosmology, which is manifested in the worldview. All of that to say that when we think, act, and behave African, then we protect what it means to be African, to think and behave Black, African, Black, African, African, Black. So the worldview helps us to see the world based on our own cultural lens. When we think of survival thrusts, I would challenge you to think about the ways in which you support African business, African Black people in business. I gave an example in one of my classes recently, and I said, where do you get the hair, the lace front? That was the example. Where do you get the lace front wig from that you are or not wearing? What cultural group of people? Whatever group of people that is, that's where your money is going to. That means you're supporting then their survival by, and you're also not operating inside the African cultural view. Okay. So some other examples are when we use, where we jokingly talked about using products that don't treat our skin specifically, and using things like shea butter, etc. So think of other examples, and you can put in your reflections. I'd love for you to like or comment in the chat what you think of that. What's another way? I'm definitely coming for the people with the lace fronts, but separate from that, people who, if you think about all the ways that money goes out of the Black community, that it does not reflect the cultural survival thrust of Black folks. So if it stays inside the community, then you're supporting Black folks and Black things. All right, moving on. Worldview system. So each culture generates its own distinct approach to an experience of reality. So the worldview system naturally evolves through and reinforces the survival maintenance of the culture. Different races, maybe different cultural groups have different cultures. And culture and worldview are a race-specific phenomenon. So going back to this idea again of the condition or process of survival maintenance, survival thrust, and how, or the function of worldview system, if we operate according to our group's concept of reality, then what is beautiful for African people or for Black people, we understand, identify it as beautiful. We try to emulate that. And that then means we support African concepts of beauty. If you are attempting to operate as an Asian person, for example, and you're African American, then that does not support the African survival thrust, and it is not a reflection of what your identity should look like. So, and when we deal with this idea that culture and world views are race-specific phenomenon, Asian people act like Asian people. African people, however, act like everybody else other than African people. Black folks act like everything else other than African people. So think of those phenomena. So there are some fundamental differences. Continuing. So we had, there are some fundamental differences between the African and European worldviews. Under normal natural conditions, so worldview, how we see, understand, interpret the world. So under normal natural conditions, Black people function in terms of the African worldview, African Black people. And white people operate in terms of the European worldview. Again, if there are any substantive deviations from these normal natural relationships, it represents an unnaturalness. Case in point, if you have a Black child who enjoys K-pop, that's fine. They listen to K-pop, it's okay. But if they want to transform their identity, hairstyle, clothing, skin color to that of a Korean, and attempt to look, act, and behave like a Korean, then that is represents unnaturalness under that there letter F. So worldview systems are important in terms of classification system. And so we're going to talk briefly about the four components of the worldview construct. These four components are cosmology, ontology, epistemology, and axiology. So if we add, in terms of research, we add methodology. We'll keep that out of there. All right. So these articulate the philosophical nature of the worldview construct and the manner in which it defines cultural reality indigenous to the racial cultural groupings. So real quick, because it's supposed to be a quick lecture. Cosmology of the four components will begin with cosmology, and the cosmological component of worldview refers to the structure of reality from a particular racial cultural perspective. So African people believe in interdependence, collectivism, oneness, and unity, whereas based on the European cosmology reflects separateness, independence, conflict, or control over nature. So ontologically, the essence of nature, essential nature of reality, it from a particular racial cultural group, African perspective emphasizes spiritual basis, where European perspective emphasizes material basis, material nature. Additionally, when it deal with epistemology or ways of knowing, the method of knowing and understanding from a particular racial cultural group perspective, African folks emphasize an affective, that's emotional, cognitive, thought process, synthesis as a way of knowing. Meaning, thinking and feeling are synthesized, whereas Europeans emphasize the cognitive over the affective, meaning thinking through something versus actually feeling it. So let me tell y'all a story. One day I had a dream. And in my dream, I forget which one it was. I mixed the two up. One of my children, I have 4 children, but it was 2 in the middle. The 2 in the middle. One of them, I dreamed the other one, and it was the other one. So I think I dreamed my son was doing something that he didn't have any business. So upon getting up, I decided to be watchful or mindful of his behavior for the day, because my affect, my emotional connection warranted my looking at and being a mama and considering, is this boy in something he'll have no business. This is all from the dream, though. All from a dream, okay? So I decided to roll up to the schoolhouse as the spirit energy began to trouble me a little bit. I get up to the schoolhouse, go to the office, ask them to call my son, just checking to make sure he's in class. You know, they're in high school. They call down, do. Oh, he's in class. Would you like him to come down? I said, no, that's okay. And I sat with it for a second. Okay, maybe I'm tripping. This is the African way, affective cognitive synthesis. So in my dream, I thought it was my son. Then I thought about it. Only other person at the schoolhouse is my daughter. Let me check on her. So 4 children, this the 2 in the middle. The son was where he was supposed to be. So I checked on my daughter. Do you know this blanker was not at school? I called her number. I said, where in the blank are you? And she says, oh, I'm in class. First of all, if you're in class, you're not answering the phone. Second, I'm at your school and I just called your class for you. Where are you? I just decided to go to the mall with my friends. This is affective cognitive synthesis as a way of knowing. My spirit told me somebody was in something they had no business. So I responded and I called. I told her she then had, if you at the mall, you got 6 minutes to get your ASS to Rickards High School office, or else I'm going to tear your behind up when I see you. 6 minutes. The clock already started. Now you at 5. Come to find out, she had left campus with some boy, and the boy had to bring her back to school. The European way would deal with the cognitive over the affective as a way of knowing. So if I thought through it, I would say, it's cool. They're at school. I called the school, the boy at school, it's no problem. My spirit led me to Rickards High School. All right. Axiological component of worldview refers to the values and attributions, defining relations between human and nature, such as our relation with other people. And again, we're looking at these two. So each one is looking at it from a different racial cultural perspective, because we're doing a comparative analysis of African perspective versus a European perspective. So the African emphasizes a person-to-person or human-to-human relationship, whereas the European emphasizes a person-to-object or human-to-object relation. So this is reflected in, the modernity, the phones, and oftentimes, even in class, you all embody the connection to the phone, where you'll be on social media, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, and TikToks. Instead of talking to the people in the room next to you or by you, getting to know them, you on the TikTok video. You're probably doing it right now. All right. So, reviewing. Worldview defines the survival thrust of a racial cultural group to which it is indigenous. Therefore, African worldview should support the African survival thrust. So each racial family has its own distinct culture and its own worldview system. So again, Asian culture should support Asian survival thrust. African culture should support an African survival thrust. European culture should support a European survival thrust. And how we see the world is connected to that. So that concludes this lecture on ontology, axiology, epistemology, and cosmology. Thank you.